In the cutthroat world of modern enterprise, where careers are built on the bones of the expendable and fortunes rise from the ashes of the replaceable, there exists a truth so brutal that most dare not speak it: your value is not determined by your kindness, your credentials, or your tenure. Your worth is measured solely by how catastrophic your absence would be. This document reveals the savage strategy that transforms ordinary professionals into indispensable forces of nature, individuals so deeply embedded in the machinery of power that removing them would cause the entire system to collapse. It is a strategy born from the cold calculations of Niccolò Machiavelli, refined through centuries of political intrigue, and adapted for the merciless landscape of contemporary business warfare. The weak believe that competence alone will protect them. The naive trust that loyalty will shield them from the executioner's blade. The foolish assume that playing by the rules guarantees survival. All of them are wrong. In boardrooms across the globe, the irreplaceable feast while the replaceable starve. The question is not whether you will choose sides in this war, the question is whether you will emerge as predator or prey. What follows is not a gentle guide to workplace harmony. It is a manual for professional warfare, a blueprint for becoming so dangerously essential that your enemies tremble at the thought of opposing you, your allies beg for your favor, and your superiors discover that their own power depends entirely on your continued presence. This is the path to becoming not just valuable, but irreplaceable, not just important, but absolutely critical to the survival of everything around you. The journey begins with understanding a fundamental truth that separates the powerful from the powerless. In every organization, there are those who can be replaced with a memo, and those whose departure would require a miracle to survive. The savage strategy ensures you belong to the latter category, wielding influence so profound that your mere existence becomes a cornerstone of institutional stability. Part 1: The Architecture of Indispensability. The first principle of becoming dangerously irreplaceable lies in understanding that true power is not granted, it is seized through the systematic accumulation of critical dependencies. While others focus on performing their assigned roles with admirable competence, the strategically minded individual recognizes that competence is merely the entry fee to a much more sophisticated game. The Real Prize belongs to those who make themselves integral to processes, relationships, and knowledge systems that cannot function without their direct involvement. Consider the difference between a skilled accountant who maintains accurate books and a financial architect who becomes the sole repository of institutional memory regarding complex regulatory interpretations, vendor relationships, and historical precedents that guide major business decisions. Both may possess similar technical qualifications, but only one has positioned themselves as irreplaceable. When budget cuts arrive, the competent accountant receives a severance package while the financial architect receives a promotion and a retention bonus. The savage strategist understands that irreplaceability is not an accident of circumstance but the deliberate result of calculated positioning. This positioning requires the systematic identification and control of organizational choke points, those critical junctions where information, authority, and operational capacity converge. By establishing yourself as the guardian of these choke points, you transform from a replaceable employee into an indispensable asset whose removal would cause cascading failures throughout the organization. The process begins with meticulous observation and analysis. Every organization contains hidden arteries through which its lifeblood flows, informal communication networks that bypass official channels, legacy systems that somehow remain critical despite their apparent obsolescence, relationships with key stakeholders that depend on personal trust rather than institutional frameworks, and repositories of tacit knowledge that exist nowhere except in the minds of longtime practitioners. While others see these elements as background noise or historical accidents, the strategically minded individual recognizes them as opportunities for entrenchment. The goal is not simply to become knowledgeable about these systems, but to become indispensable to their continued operation. This requires a careful balance between visibility and subtlety. You must be known as the person who makes things work without advertising the extent of your control over critical processes. The cultivation of information asymmetry represents one of the most powerful tools in this arsenal. In every organization, information flows through both formal and informal channels, creating opportunities for strategic positioning at key convergence points. By positioning yourself as a hub through which important information must pass, you create value that extends far beyond your nominal job description. This is not about hoarding information for its own sake, but about becoming the trusted interpreter, synthesizer, and distributor of critical intelligence. The most sophisticated practitioners of this art understand that information control works best when it appears to be a natural consequence of helpfulness rather than deliberate manipulation. You become the person others turn to not because you withhold information, but because you consistently provide context, analysis, and insights that transform raw data into actionable intelligence. Over time, this pattern creates dependencies that become deeply embedded in organizational culture. Relationship architecture represents another crucial dimension of irreplaceability. While others focus on managing up to their immediate superiors, the strategically minded individual recognizes that sustainable power requires a more sophisticated approach to relationship building. This involves identifying the informal power networks that actually govern organizational behavior and positioning yourself as a critical node within these networks. The key insight is that organizational charts represent official authority, but real power flows through relationship networks that often bear little resemblance to formal hierarchies. The assistant who has become confidant to the CEO wields more practical influence than vice presidents who lack such access. The IT specialist who has earned the trust of department heads across the organization possesses more strategic value than senior managers who remain isolated within their functional silos. Building these relationships requires a deep understanding of what each key stakeholder values and needs. This goes beyond simple networking or superficial relationship building. You must become genuinely valuable to important people by solving problems they cannot solve themselves, providing insights they cannot obtain elsewhere, or serving as a reliable bridge between different organizational factions. The process of relationship architecture must be approached with careful attention to reciprocity and authenticity. People of real influence can immediately detect and despise obvious attempts at manipulation. Your value to them must be genuine and substantial, based on your ability to deliver results they care about. However, this does not mean your motives must be purely altruistic. The most effective approach combines genuine helpfulness with strategic positioning, creating relationships that serve both parties while advancing your long-term objectives. Operational entrenchment represents the third pillar of irreplaceability. This involves the deliberate integration of your personal capabilities into the fundamental operations of the organization in ways that make your removal extremely costly and disruptive. The goal is to become not just proficient at certain tasks, but essential to the successful completion of critical processes. This type of entrenchment often begins with voluntary assumption of responsibilities that others prefer to avoid. These might include managing complex vendor relationships, serving as the primary interface with difficult but important clients, or becoming the go-to expert for handling sensitive regulatory compliance issues. While others shy away from such responsibilities due to their complexity or potential for controversy, the strategically minded individual recognizes them as opportunities for entrenchment. The key is to select responsibilities that are genuinely important to organizational success but difficult to transfer quickly to someone else. Ideally, these should be areas where your departure would create immediate operational difficulties while your presence enables smooth, efficient operations. Over time, you become not just responsible for these areas, but irreplaceable within them. The most sophisticated form of operational entrenchment involves the creation of systems and processes that depend on your unique combination of skills, relationships, and institutional knowledge. This might involve developing proprietary methodologies for complex problem solving, creating integrated workflows that span multiple departments, or establishing communication protocols that depend on your personal relationships with key stakeholders. However, operational entrenchment must be managed carefully to avoid the trap of becoming indispensable to low-value activities. The goal is to become essential to processes that directly impact organizational success, not to become the person who knows how to operate the old copy machine that everyone is afraid to replace. Strategic entrenchment focuses on high-impact areas where your unique capabilities create substantial value for the organization. The cultivation of unique expertise represents another powerful avenue for building irreplaceability. This involves developing deep knowledge in areas that are critical to organizational success but poorly understood by most other employees. The key is to identify emerging challenges or evolving regulatory environments where specialized knowledge will become increasingly valuable over time. This type of expertise development requires significant investment in learning and staying current with rapidly evolving fields. However, the returns can be extraordinary when you become the recognized internal expert on something that suddenly becomes critically important to organizational survival or success. Examples might include emerging regulatory frameworks, new technologies that could transform industry practices, or evolving customer preferences that require sophisticated understanding to navigate successfully. The development of unique expertise works best when combined with effective communication skills that allow you to translate complex technical knowledge into actionable insights for decision makers. Being the smartest person in the room is valuable, but being the smartest person who can clearly explain complex issues to non-experts is irreplaceable. Throughout this process of building irreplaceability, it is crucial to maintain careful attention to perception management. Your growing influence and importance must be recognized by key decision-makers without triggering defensive reactions from potential rivals or creating perceptions that you are accumulating power inappropriately. This requires a delicate balance between visibility and humility, confidence and collaboration. The most effective approach involves consistent delivery of exceptional results while maintaining a collaborative and supportive demeanor. You want to be seen as someone whose success elevates everyone around them rather than someone who advances at others' expense. This perception creates positive reinforcement cycles where others actively support your growing influence because they benefit from it themselves. The architecture of indispensability is not built overnight. It requires patience, strategic thinking, and consistent execution over extended periods. However, the investment pays extraordinary dividends in terms of career security, compensation growth, and professional autonomy. More importantly, it creates a foundation for advancing to positions of genuine leadership where your influence extends far beyond your immediate responsibilities. As this foundation solidifies, the focus shifts from building irreplaceability to leveraging it effectively. This transition marks the movement from defensive positioning to offensive strategy, from protecting your current position to expanding your influence and control throughout the organization. The next phase of the Savage strategy involves transforming your irreplaceable status into a platform for acquiring and wielding real power. Part 2: The weaponization of indispensability. Once the foundation of irreplaceability has been established, the truly strategic individual recognizes that mere indispensability is insufficient for achieving dominance. The transition from being irreplaceable to being dangerous requires the systematic weaponization of your position, transforming defensive assets into offensive capabilities that can reshape organizational dynamics according to your will. The most sophisticated practitioners understand that power is not a static possession but a dynamic force that must be continuously expanded or it will inevitably contract. Your irreplaceable status creates opportunities, but only through aggressive exploitation of these opportunities can you achieve the level of influence that makes opposition not just difficult, but genuinely dangerous for those who might consider it. The first weapon in this arsenal is the strategic control of critical pathways. Having established yourself as essential to key processes, you must now leverage this position to influence decisions that extend far beyond your nominal area of responsibility. This requires a deep understanding of how organizational decision-making actually occurs, as opposed to how it appears to occur according to official procedures. In most organizations, official decision-making processes represent elaborate theater designed to create the impression of systematic analysis and democratic input. The real decisions are made through informal consultations, corridor conversations, and private meetings that occur before official discussions begin. Your goal is to position yourself as an indispensable participant in these informal processes, ensuring that no significant decision can be made without your input and approval. This positioning requires careful cultivation of what intelligence professionals call decision proximity, the ability to be present when important choices are being considered. Decision proximity cannot be demanded or officially assigned, it must be earned through consistent demonstration of valuable judgment and discretion. You must become someone whose insights consistently prove useful to decision makers, whose analysis reliably identifies problems and solutions that others miss, and whose judgment can be trusted with sensitive information. The development of decision proximity often begins with volunteering for cross-functional projects and task forces that bring together representatives from different organizational units. These assignments provide opportunities to demonstrate your capabilities to influential people outside your immediate chain of command while building relationships that can be leveraged in future situations. However, mere participation is insufficient. You must consistently distinguish yourself as someone who adds unique value to these collaborative efforts. This might involve bringing insights from your area of expertise that illuminate problems others have not recognized, proposing solutions that elegantly address multiple stakeholder concerns simultaneously, or serving as an effective bridge between different organizational cultures and priorities. The key is to become known as someone whose participation improves the quality of group decision-making. Over time, this reputation creates informal expectations that you will be consulted on important matters even when you have no official role in the decision process. Eventually, excluding you from important discussions begins to feel like a mistake that prudent leaders avoid making. The second weapon involves the strategic deployment of institutional memory. Every organization possesses vast stores of historical knowledge about past decisions, failed initiatives, successful strategies, and lessons learned through experience. Most of this knowledge exists in informal, undocumented form within the minds of longtime employees. By positioning yourself as the primary repository and interpreter of this institutional memory, you create influence that extends far beyond your current responsibilities. The cultivation of institutional memory requires systematic effort to understand not just what happened in the past, but why certain approaches succeeded or failed, what environmental factors contributed to various outcomes, and how historical patterns might inform current challenges. This knowledge becomes particularly valuable when organizations face novel situations that appear unprecedented but actually share important characteristics with past experiences. Your role as institutional memory keeper must be deployed strategically rather than opportunistically. The goal is not to overwhelm every discussion with historical precedents, but to intervene at crucial moments when historical perspective can prevent costly mistakes or illuminate promising approaches that might otherwise be overlooked. When your interventions consistently prove valuable, people begin to seek your input proactively rather than discovering its value retrospectively. The most sophisticated application of institutional memory involves the ability to provide historical context that supports your preferred outcomes while appearing to offer neutral, objective analysis. This requires deep understanding of organizational culture and careful attention to how historical narratives can be constructed to support different strategic directions. The third weapon in your arsenal is the systematic cultivation of information asymmetries that favor your position. While others focus on accessing information, the strategically minded individual focuses on controlling how information is interpreted and understood. This involves positioning yourself as the authoritative source of analysis and insight regarding information that others can access but cannot effectively utilize. This type of information control works most effectively in complex, rapidly evolving domains where raw data requires sophisticated interpretation to generate actionable intelligence. Examples might include regulatory compliance issues where rules are subject to frequent changes and ambiguous enforcement, market analysis where technical expertise is required to separate meaningful trends from statistical noise, or technology assessment where deep knowledge is needed to evaluate competing solutions. By developing genuine expertise in such areas, you create situations where others depend on your analysis even when they have access to the same underlying information. Over time, this dependency creates opportunities to shape organizational understanding of critical issues in ways that support your strategic objectives. The deployment of information asymmetries requires careful attention to credibility and accuracy. Your analysis must be genuinely valuable and demonstrably superior to alternatives available from other sources. Any perception that you are manipulating information to serve personal interests rather than organizational needs will undermine the foundation of trust upon which this strategy depends. However, within the constraints of accuracy and organizational value, there remains substantial room for emphasis, framing, and selective focus that can influence how information is understood and applied. The key is to ensure that your preferred strategic directions appear to emerge naturally from objective analysis rather than reflecting personal bias or self-interest. The fourth weapon involves the strategic management of organizational dependencies in ways that maximize your leverage while minimizing risks to your position. This requires careful analysis of the network of interdependencies that you have created through your irreplaceable status, with particular attention to identifying additional leverage points that can be developed and activated when needed. The goal is to create a situation where your potential departure would trigger not just immediate operational difficulties, but cascading disruptions that would be extremely costly and time-consuming to resolve. This might involve ensuring that key vendor relationships depend on personal trust that cannot be easily transferred, that important client connections are maintained through your direct involvement, or that critical processes depend on tacit knowledge that would be difficult to document and transfer to a replacement. However, the most sophisticated practitioners understand that creating dependencies is only half of the equation. Equally important is the ability to communicate the scope and consequences of these dependencies to decision-makers in ways that influence their calculations without appearing to threaten the organization or engage in workplace extortion. This communication typically occurs through seemingly neutral discussions of succession planning, risk management, or operational continuity. The goal is to ensure that decision-makers understand the true costs and complexities associated with replacing you while maintaining the appearance of being helpful and organizationally focused rather than self-interested. The fifth weapon in your arsenal involves the strategic cultivation of external relationships that create additional leverage within your organization. This might include relationships with important clients or customers who specifically value working with you, connections with industry experts or regulatory officials who recognize your expertise, or partnerships with vendors or service providers who prefer conducting business through your oversight. These external relationships create value that extends beyond your internal contributions while providing additional protection against organizational changes that might threaten your position. When external stakeholders specifically request your involvement or express concerns about your potential departure, it creates powerful incentives for your organization to retain and empower you. The development of external relationships requires careful balance between organizational interests and personal positioning. Your external contacts must genuinely benefit your organization while creating preferences for working with you specifically. This typically involves becoming recognized as an expert in your field through conference presentations, industry publications, or other forms of thought leadership that establish your personal reputation independently of your organizational affiliation. The cultivation of external relationships also provides valuable intelligence about industry trends, competitive dynamics, and emerging opportunities that can enhance your internal value while creating additional sources of career security. When your external network provides early warning about important developments or opens doors to new opportunities, it reinforces your value to current stakeholders while creating alternatives if your current situation becomes untenable. Throughout this process of weaponizing your irreplaceable status, it is crucial to maintain careful attention to risk management. The accumulation of power inevitably creates enemies and generates resistance from those whose interests are threatened by your growing influence. The most dangerous period in implementing the savage strategy often occurs during the transition from defensive irreplaceability to offensive power, when your capabilities are becoming apparent but are not yet fully consolidated. This transitional period requires heightened attention to alliance building, reputation management, and situational awareness. You must be prepared to defend your position against both direct attacks and subtle undermining while continuing to expand your influence and consolidate your gains. The key is to move quickly enough to establish unassailable advantages before opposition can organize effectively, while avoiding actions that are so aggressive or threatening that they trigger coordinated resistance from powerful adversaries. The successful weaponization of irreplaceability creates a platform for the final phase of the savage strategy, the establishment of permanent dominance through the creation of systems and structures that perpetuate and expand your power independent of your continued personal effort. This transition represents the movement from personal influence to institutional control, from being dangerously irreplaceable to being absolutely dominant. Part 3, the consolidation of absolute power. The final stage of the savage strategy transcends mere irreplaceability and advances into the realm of absolute dominance, a position so thoroughly entrenched that opposition becomes not just difficult, but genuinely suicidal for those who might contemplate it. This transformation requires moving beyond personal indispensability to the creation of institutional structures that perpetuate and amplify your power independent of your daily involvement. The sophisticated practitioner recognizes that true dominance is achieved not through constant personal intervention, but through the establishment of systems that operate according to your strategic vision while appearing to function according to neutral, organizational principles. This represents the ultimate evolution of Machiavellian strategy, the creation of power structures that serve your interests while maintaining the appearance of serving institutional needs. The foundation of this consolidation lies in understanding that sustainable dominance requires the transformation of personal assets into institutional advantages. Your network of relationships, accumulated expertise, and operational control must be systematically converted into formal and informal structures that will continue to advance your interests even when you are not personally involved in every decision. This transformation begins with the strategic deployment of succession planning and knowledge management initiatives. While others view these activities as defensive measures designed to reduce organizational risk, the strategically minded individual recognizes them as opportunities to shape the institutional infrastructure in ways that perpetuate personal influence. The key insight is that succession planning allows you to influence the selection and development of potential successors in ways that ensure continued loyalty and dependence. Rather than training replacements who might eventually threaten your position, you cultivate protégés whose success depends on your continued guidance and support. These individuals become extensions of your influence rather than potential competitors. This cultivation process requires careful attention to psychology and motivation. The most effective protégés are those who possess genuine capability and ambition but lack the specific combination of skills, relationships, and institutional knowledge that you have developed. By providing them with opportunities for advancement while maintaining their dependence on your expertise and connections, you create a network of allies whose interests are aligned with your continued dominance. The development of these relationships must appear natural and beneficial to all parties involved. Your protégés should genuinely benefit from your mentorship and guidance, advancing their careers in ways that would not have been possible without your support. However, their advancement should occur in directions that complement rather than threaten your strategic position, creating a constellation of influence that radiates outward from your central position. Knowledge management initiatives provide another avenue for consolidating control while appearing to serve institutional interests. By documenting and systematizing the expertise you have developed, you create formal recognition of your unique value while maintaining subtle control over how that knowledge is understood and applied. The key to effective knowledge management is to capture and share enough information to demonstrate the scope and complexity of your expertise while maintaining control over the critical insights and relationships that create real competitive advantage. This typically involves creating comprehensive documentation of processes and procedures while maintaining personal control over the interpretive frameworks and relationship networks that make those processes effective. This approach serves multiple strategic purposes simultaneously. It provides evidence of your substantial contributions to organizational capability, creates additional barriers to your replacement by demonstrating the scope of knowledge that would need to be transferred, and establishes your authority as the definitive source of expertise in your domain. Most importantly, it allows you to shape how your successors understand and approach their responsibilities, ensuring continuity of your strategic vision even after your direct involvement ends. The second major dimension of consolidation involves the systematic expansion of your influence into areas that were previously outside your direct control. This expansion must be managed carefully to avoid triggering defensive reactions while steadily increasing the scope of your authority and the consequences of your potential opposition. The most effective approach involves identifying organizational challenges that require cross-functional solutions, positioning yourself as the natural leader for addressing these challenges, and using the success of these initiatives to justify expanded authority and resources. This pattern creates a positive feedback loop where success generates additional opportunities for expansion, which in turn creates additional sources of success. The selection of expansion targets requires careful strategic analysis. The ideal candidates are areas that are important enough to generate significant organizational attention and resources, but poorly managed enough that your intervention can produce dramatic improvements. Additionally, these areas should involve challenges that play to your existing strengths while providing opportunities to develop new capabilities and relationships. The expansion process must be managed with careful attention to the interests and concerns of existing stakeholders. Rather than displacing current authority figures, the most effective approach involves creating collaborative frameworks that enhance their effectiveness while establishing your central role in coordination and oversight. This approach generates support rather than resistance while achieving your strategic objectives. Over time, this pattern of successful expansion creates informal expectations that you will be involved in addressing major organizational challenges. Eventually, excluding you from important initiatives begins to appear irresponsible rather than simply inappropriate. This transformation of informal influence into institutional expectation represents a crucial milestone in the consolidation of absolute power. The third dimension of consolidation involves the strategic management of organizational culture in ways that support and perpetuate your dominance. This requires understanding culture as a system of shared beliefs, values, and practices that shape how people think about problems and evaluate solutions. By influencing these underlying frameworks, you can shape organizational behavior in ways that consistently favor your strategic objectives. Cultural influence typically begins with the promotion of values and practices that happen to align with your natural strengths and preferred approaches. For example, if your expertise lies in analytical problem solving, you might champion initiatives that emphasize data-driven decision-making and systematic analysis. If your strengths involve relationship building and negotiation, you might promote collaborative approaches and stakeholder engagement as organizational priorities. The key is to frame these preferences in terms of organizational effectiveness rather than personal advantage. Your preferred approaches must genuinely contribute to improved performance while creating environments where your capabilities are particularly valuable and your judgment is frequently sought. Cultural influence requires patience and persistence, as fundamental changes in organizational behavior typically occur gradually through accumulated small shifts rather than dramatic revolutionary changes. However, the long-term impact of successful cultural influence is extraordinarily powerful, creating environments where your dominance appears natural and necessary rather than imposed or artificial. The most sophisticated practitioners understand that cultural influence works most effectively when it operates below the threshold of conscious awareness. People should embrace values and practices that support your position because they appear obviously correct and beneficial, not because they recognize their strategic implications for power distribution within the organization. The fourth dimension of consolidation involves the creation of formal institutional structures that embed your influence in organizational systems and processes. This might involve the establishment of new committees, task forces, or advisory groups that require your participation or oversight. It could include the development of new policies and procedures that formalize approaches you have pioneered. It might involve the creation of new positions or reporting relationships that institutionalize patterns of influence you have established informally. The goal is to transform informal influence into formal authority while maintaining the flexibility and responsiveness that made that influence effective in the first place. This requires careful balance between structure and adaptability, between formal recognition and practical effectiveness. The creation of formal structures provides multiple strategic advantages. It legitimizes your authority in ways that make it more difficult for opponents to challenge or undermine. It creates official recognition of your contributions and expertise. Most importantly, it establishes institutional momentum that will continue to advance your interests even when you are not personally present to guide every decision. However, the formalization of influence also creates new vulnerabilities that must be carefully managed. Formal structures can be modified or eliminated through official processes in ways that informal influence cannot. Additionally, formal authority creates expectations for performance and accountability that informal influence typically avoids. The most effective approach involves creating formal structures that capture the benefits of official recognition while maintaining substantial informal influence that cannot be easily eliminated through procedural changes. This typically requires building formal authority that depends on informal capabilities, creating situations where the formal structure cannot function effectively without your continued involvement and support. The fifth dimension of consolidation involves the strategic management of external relationships and reputation in ways that create additional protection and leverage for your internal position. This requires building recognition and credibility within your industry or professional community that makes your potential departure costly for your organization while creating alternative opportunities that strengthen your negotiating position. External reputation building typically involves thought leadership activities such as speaking at industry conferences, publishing articles in professional journals, or participating in industry associations and standards committees. The goal is to become recognized as an expert whose insights are valued by external stakeholders while maintaining strong identification with your current organization. This external recognition creates multiple forms of leverage. It makes your organization reluctant to lose someone who enhances their external reputation and industry connections. It provides early warning about industry trends and opportunities that can enhance your internal value. Most importantly, it creates alternative career options that strengthen your negotiating position while reducing your dependence on any single organizational relationship. The cultivation of external relationships must be managed carefully to avoid creating perceptions that you are more committed to external activities than internal responsibilities. The goal is to enhance your value to your current organization rather than to signal availability for external opportunities. Your external activities should consistently reinforce your expertise and contribution to your current role while building the broader reputation that protects and strengthens your position. The consolidation of absolute power represents the culmination of a systematic strategy that transforms ordinary professionals into dominant organizational forces. However, this transformation requires more than just tactical execution. It demands fundamental changes in how you understand and approach professional relationships, organizational dynamics, and strategic thinking. The successful practitioner of the Savage strategy develops what might be called strategic consciousness, a continuous awareness of how every interaction, decision, and initiative affects the broader landscape of organizational power and influence. This consciousness allows you to recognize opportunities that others miss, anticipate challenges before they become serious threats, and position yourself advantageously for future developments that less strategic individuals cannot foresee. Strategic consciousness also requires emotional discipline and psychological resilience. The accumulation of power inevitably creates stress, opposition, and moral complexity that can be difficult to navigate. The most successful practitioners develop the emotional resources necessary to maintain their strategic focus while managing the human costs of pursuing and wielding significant influence. The ultimate goal of the Savage strategy is not merely personal advancement, but the creation of sustainable platforms for achieving meaningful objectives that extend beyond individual career success. True dominance provides the foundation for shaping organizational direction, influencing industry development, and creating lasting impact that justifies the effort and risk involved in pursuing absolute power. The transformation from replaceable employee to dangerously irreplaceable force to absolutely dominant leader represents one of the most challenging and rewarding journeys available in professional life. It requires intelligence, courage, persistence, and strategic sophistication that few individuals possess or develop. However, for those capable of implementing the Savage strategy successfully, it offers the ultimate prize, the power to shape their environment according to their vision while achieving levels of influence and impact that remain forever beyond the reach of those who settle for conventional approaches to career development. The Savage strategy is not for everyone. It demands moral flexibility, strategic thinking, and relentless execution that many will find incompatible with their values or capabilities. However, for those who possess the necessary qualities and are willing to pay the required price, it offers a path to power that transforms not just individual careers, but entire organizational landscapes according to their strategic vision and personal will. In the end, the choice between conventional career development and the Savage strategy represents a fundamental decision about how you wish to engage with the world of professional power and organizational influence. The conventional path offers security, predictability, and moral simplicity at the cost of significant limitations on your ultimate impact and influence. The Savage strategy offers the possibility of extraordinary achievement and absolute dominance at the cost of complexity, risk, and moral ambiguity that will test every aspect of your character and capability. The decision is yours to make. But, for those who choose the path of the Savage strategy, the journey toward becoming dangerously irreplaceable begins with the first strategic decision to view your professional environment not as a cooperative community, but as a battlefield where only the most sophisticated and ruthless practitioners achieve true victory. Claude is AI and can make mistakes. Please double-check responses. Sonnet 4 Claude is AI and can make mistakes. Please daub.